I'm Julie Alexandria.
And I'm Jennifer Mercedes.
Between the two of us, we have over 2 decades of experience working in professional sports.
We're telling the stories of women who are at the top of their game in sports and business.
Welcome
to the locker room.
She's currently covering her 3rd major league team, the Washington Nationals, as a staff writer for The Athletic. She's also covered the Angels for the LA Times, as well as the Kansas City Royals. It is our pleasure to welcome to the locker room, Maria Torres. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me on.
Awesome. Thank you for being here and for taking time out of your day. I know the baseball schedule is never ending, so we appreciate it. We're going to start this off with a quick fire round. I want you to answer the first thing that comes to mind when we throw a question your way. First up, who is your favorite athlete of all time?
I didn't really watch many sports until I started watching baseball, and that was like in middle school. And that was like toward the end of like the Braves' dominance. So I'm going to go with like Chipper Jones. I think Chipper Jones is probably my all-time favorite.
Now, what has been your highlight of your career so far?
Ooh, okay. That's a really tough one. I don't even know how to answer it. Let's see. I've gotten to go to the World Series. That was really fun. And to get to cover that. So that's a pretty big highlight. I worked on a couple of like award-winning projects, and those were definitely really rewarding experiences. One of them required a trip to the Dominican Republic when we covered the death of Yordano Ventura at the Kansas City Star. So I would say that was a pretty big highlight for sure.
If you weren't a journalist, what other occupation would you want to pursue?
Sadly, I've thought about this a lot. I kind of waffle between wanting to be like, if I weren't a journalist, like thinking, okay, maybe I would be in public relations, but probably baseball public relations of some kind, maybe working for an agency or something. And other than that, like I've also wondered, like, oh, could I be a good English teacher? I don't know, but those are two career paths I've thought about before.
Favorite MLB stadium?
So I haven't been to all of the stadiums yet. And of course, last year I didn't really get to travel much at all. So I kind of have like a shoddy memory on this, but I will say one of my favorite stadiums to visit is definitely Target Field. I really like the location, and it's a really pretty ballpark just to be in. If I recall correctly, pretty convenient media access as well. So that's always like one of the factors that I weigh into like whether or not I like a stadium. So I would say Target Field is one of the top.
Least favorite?
Oh, that was easy. Oakland. I spent too much time at Oakland Coliseum, it feels like. Even though I only covered the Angels for 2 years, I felt like, that was enough. Plus, visiting there with the Royals. I don't need any more Oakland in my life.
What are your thoughts on Vegas?
So I've only been to Vegas once. It was with at the winter meetings a few years ago. I don't know. I'm not sure how I feel about Vegas. I'll reserve judgment. I'm not sure if I would enjoy it.
What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. We'll leave it at that.
All right. Well, what's your favorite food that you always have to have when you go visit home?
It kind of depends on the time of the year. Sometimes it's sancocho. My mom makes a great sancocho. Other times, it's mofongo, and honestly, whatever meat they want to cook that day, I'm good with it. Other times, definitely arroz con gandules was a big one for me, and I love that just with just chicken. Honestly, that's a good enough dish for me. But of course, rice, beans, and chicken is. It's the weight of my heart. I mean, honestly, if the dish has that, I'm good.
I've been eating sancocho for 3 days in my house. My mom made some, and literally that's been like either breakfast, lunch, or dinner.
Yeah, I love that you have it for breakfast. That's smart too.
Yeah, it's nice on the stomach. If you just have the el caldo, like the broth of it, it's good. Let's talk about your journey and becoming a baseball writer. Who was the most influential person, and who introduced you to the game of baseball?
My dad introduced me to the game of baseball. And, I come from a Puerto Rican Dominican family. My dad is Puerto Rican, and he well, he always loved the sport, and naturally, as a Puerto Rican, a big Yankees fan. And when he was early on in his career, he worked for one of the winter league teams in Puerto Rico. He was a PR director, and so he always had that love for the sport. So he tried to like share it with both my sister and myself when we were really, really young, having just moved to Florida. We were able to watch the Marlins World Series. I mean, I have a vague recollection of kind of being in the living room when that kind of stuff was happening, but it was never something that really like mattered to me. And a few years later, even it was the other Marlins Yankees World Series. Then, I mean, I remember watching a little bit of that, but it was even at that point, I was in middle school. I didn't really resonate. And then one time, we ended up going to a Braves game as a family, and it was a Sunday day game. And I remember just really loving the atmosphere there, and that kind of just hooked me. And I just kept watching. And at that point, not all the games were on TV, so I would also listen to radio calls of the games, and it was kind of just easy to really like fall in love with the sport that way, just kind of immersing yourself in it. And I was kind of a nerd about it too. I kind of kept like a little like calendar where I would like write down just like significant moments in games, and I think I might have those around somewhere, if not here at my parents' house or something, just kind of like document like my fandom at the time. So that's how I got into baseball.
You were already doing your job at a young age, writing down significant points.
I guess that's true. Yeah, I didn't think about it that way, but I was definitely doing it.
Were you also keeping score at the same time?
I had not done that, no. But I do remember like having like a binder where I would write down like really interesting quotes that I heard.
See, and they say what you do as a kid is what you end up doing when you're older. Like that is a perfect example. Mm-hmm. Like that. That's amazing. I want to know, I love that you have the Puerto Rican flag and the Dominican flag on your Twitter handle. How did your upbringing in Puerto Rico, how you talked about your dad being Puerto Rican, your mom being Dominican, how did that influence and how did that inform your career today as far as your access with the guys?
Wow. First of all, Spanish was my first language. I was born in Puerto Rico and lived there until I was 2.5 when my sister was born. So when I was learning to speak, it was all in Spanish. So I learned English later on, and it's my dominant language now. But it's always been there. And of course at home, that's all we really speak. That's all my parents wanted us to speak at home. And there was a little bit of a language barrier anyway. But that's, my parents were really adamant about making sure that we understood Spanish and could use it in real life. And I'm like so grateful for that, because it could have been a situation where growing up in Florida and Georgia, especially, it could have just only spoken English at home. And with my sister, my sister and I always communicated in English, but it could have been a situation where we didn't really have that immersion in the language. And I could have been a baseball writer who doesn't really know Spanish all that well. And I'm so grateful to be able to be in this career where it's so beneficial. As you all know, there's so many Latinos in the game, and so many of their stories haven't yet been told. And it's up to people who can speak Spanish to do that for them, because a lot of times they can't really do it themselves, or they're misunderstood or misinterpreted in a lot of situations. So I would say that's been a huge benefit to my career.
Yeah, being bilingual is definitely a benefit to everyone. If you can, learn that second language. But now it took MLB until 2016 to implement a designated interpreter for Latin players. Do you feel that the Latin guys are given fair coverage and a voice in the American media?
That's definitely a hard one to answer, because when you look at the way that teams handle even that role, it's kind of not all uniform, as we all know. They get a lot of teams get away with just having coaches as interpreters, and then it ends up being, getting run around from the coach, and then you also have to try to coordinate with the player, and ends up being a whole mess. I don't personally have to deal with it, but I do know that there are a lot of colleagues and other journalists who have that problem, and they can't really do interviews that they want to do because the interpreter isn't available. So I don't know if that really, I'm sure it's changed the access, between the American media and Spanish speakers, but I don't know that it's really done the job as it should. I just feel like there's too many times where things just aren't, being, discussed as they should be.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's one thing that you think MLB could and possibly should change?
Regarding that policy?
That policy or any policy relating to journalists or to your experience, not so much on the field stuff. We'll leave that to the ball players, but more so as it pertains to journalists and the player-reporter relationship.
I personally think that there should be some kind of like policy in place that players are required to be available to the media for a certain amount of time every day. So that way we kind of avoid that whole situation where you're just waiting around in the locker room hoping to catch somebody. I think that should be kind of mandated, where there should be like a set amount of availability for every player, whether it's like 15-minute windows, it doesn't matter. Like it's just, I think those players just need to be available. When it comes to translators, obviously it's a huge advantage to me that policy isn't working all that great. But in terms of like, when it comes to fairness, I really think that translators should be required to be like specialized in that job. There are a lot of times, even, it just feels like a lot of times the words are being doctored. You guys hear it, in interviews that are being interpreted. It's just, a lot of it's like, oh, well, kind of almost like trying to protect the player in a way. Maybe doesn't even notice, but that's a job that can be executed very well by somebody who is trained in it and is trained in interpretation and trained in translating on the spot. And I think that really needs to be addressed.
Before we let you go, what are some words of encouragement or advice that you could give some young Latinas who are looking to break into the sports industry?
I mean, the top one, of course, is to just keep trying. Even if someone tells you no, you just keep going for it if it's something you really care about, and keep practicing your Spanish, because it'll become really, really important to you in the sport. Well, not only in baseball, in a lot of industries, obviously, but in the sports world for sure. And I don't know, maybe also just kind of keep a level head about it as well. I mean, not everything is going to be given to you on a silver platter simply because you are bilingual. You're going to have to work for stuff. So I think those are the top three things I would say.
Yeah, super important, especially in all, I guess, in a whole swath of MLB positions, not just reporting, but PR, front office, all so important. Thank you so much for joining us, Maria Torres. An absolute pleasure to chat with you here in the locker room. We appreciate your time.
Yes, me too. Thank you so much for having me on, ladies.
I grew up with that mindset that nothing is gender defined, right? That if you're a little girl or you're a little boy, you can do anything you want.